Gladiatorial games were the centerpiece of everyday life in the Roman Empire. Citizens flocked to watch the wildly popular games. Emperors and prominent officials would display their wealth and power by funding the games. The games were also used to commemorate important events such as military victories and visits from important officials, as well as to distract the citizens from economic and political issues. The Etruscans in northern Italy are the first people known to have held gladiatorial-style games. The Romans continued this practice and held games 10 to 12 times a year. The earliest Roman gladiatorial games took place around 264 BC during the First Punic War against Carthage. The most famous setting for gladiatorial games was the Colosseum in Rome. But the games also took place in amphitheaters and other venues across the empire. There were four primary classes or types of gladiators: Samnites, Thrakes, Mirmillo, and Retiarius. Samnites carried a large oblong shield called a scutum and fought with a sword or spear. They wore a visored helmet. Their right leg was protected by a greave, and their right arm by a sleeve. The Thrakes, also known as the Thracian, wore a helmet and fought with a sicca, which is a curved sword. This gladiator also used a small shield. Mirmillo gladiators wore a large helmet with a visor. They fought with a gladius and had a large shield. A gladius was the short sword used by gladiators. This is where the name for gladiators originates from. The retiarius, meaning netman, used a net to trap opponents and used a trident and dagger. This type of gladiator did not wear a helmet. Before gladiatorial games at the Colosseum would begin, there was a parade with the emperor and other high-ranking magistrates. The gladiators were made up primarily of slaves, criminals, prisoners of war, but occasionally also free citizens in need of money would volunteer. Gladiators trained at specialized schools called ludi in hopes of becoming the best. Upon entering a school, gladiators took an oath: Iuri vincere ferberari feroque necari. I undertake to be burnt by fire, to be bound in chains, to be beaten, to die by the sword. The most famous gladiator of all time was Spartacus. Well known for his role in the Third Servile War, he led an uprising of gladiators and other slaves from Ludi in Capua. Spartacus and his followers had a series of victories against a number of Roman legions before ultimately being defeated by Marcus Licinius Crassus. Gladiatorial games were an all-day affair. The afternoon was the most anticipated part because this is when the gladiators would fight. There were typically multiple matches that displayed different types of armor and fighting styles. Although the fighting was brutal, it was not always to the death. Gladiators were great athletes who made a living by the sword. Keeping them alive meant they could entertain again. Sometimes gladiators didn't want to fight. If so, their lanista, or manager, and his slaves would force them into the fight with whips and branding irons. If a gladiator had been taken over by their opponent, the crowd would either put a thumb down or point to their chest. Thumbs down meant that the gladiator had fought bravely and should be spared, while thumbs up meant that they should be killed. In tradition, if a gladiator was to be killed, he was expected to do so without flinching or showing any emotion. If the emperor was in attendance, they would usually make the decision. There was an attendant who wore the mask of Mercury, the guide to the underworld. They would go around with a hot iron to make sure the fallen were dead. The winner would receive a crown and prize money. If a gladiator won a rudis, they would be free. Some freed gladiators would continue to fight for money, while others became trainers at gladiator schools or even bodyguards for wealthy citizens. The games did not just involve humans. There were also exhibitions that involved animals. Wild animals, such as lions and tigers, were matched up against each other or humans. A bestiary was a type of gladiator that participated in these games. In 80 AD, Emperor Titus had 5,000 beasts killed in a single day. Incense burners were set up throughout the city to combat this smell. The Colosseum in Rome was not only designed to have standard gladiatorial fights, but also large-scale mock naval battles called naumachia. These staged battles only happened on significant occasions, such as Caesar's quadruple triumph. In the year 404 CE, with the rise of the new Christian Empire, the gladiatorial games' prominence in Roman life came to an end. Emperor Honorius stopped the gladiatorial games by first closing the Ludi and then ultimately banning the games. If a gladiator had fought bravely and was struck down by his opponent, what would a thumbs down from the crowd indicate? To kill him or to spare his life? To spare his life. What type of gladiator used a net to trap his opponent? Was it a Samnite, a Retiarius, Thrax, or Murmillo? Retiarius. What god would the attendant who probed the victims with a hot iron be dressed as? Was it Zeus, Hades, Mercury, Apollo, or Ares? Mercury. In 80 AD, what Roman emperor had 5,000 beasts killed in a single day at the inauguration of the Colosseum? Was it Nero, Titus, Caligula, or Vespasian? Titus. If you were to become a gladiator, what words would you swear by? Uri vincere verberari feraque necari. I undertake to be burnt by fire, to be bound in chains, to be beaten, to die by the sword. The earliest gladiatorial games took place in 264 BC. True or false? True.